My name is Jake Anderson, and for the last 7 years, my life has revolved around one thing: work. At 29, I had earned the title of Senior Marketing Executive at Anderson & Cole Technologies, a company known for moving fast and expecting even faster results. I wasn't born into wealth or handed opportunities through family connections. Every promotion came from long nights, impossible deadlines, and more coffee than any doctor would recommend. People often joke that I spent more time in the office than in my apartment. They weren't entirely wrong. Still, I love my job. There was something satisfying about watching a campaign succeed after months of planning. The pressure kept me sharp, and the constant challenges made every day different. Monday mornings, however, tested everyone's patience. The elevators were crowded, phones rang nonstop, and half the office looked like they hadn't slept since Friday. I stepped out of the elevator balancing a laptop, a coffee cup, and a folder of presentation notes. That was when I saw her. She stood near the reception desk, slowly turning in a circle while looking from one hallway to another. She wore a simple white blouse beneath a navy blazer, dark trousers, and comfortable shoes instead of the towering heels many executives preferred. Around her neck hung a bright visitor badge. She looked completely lost. Our receptionist was busy answering 2 phone calls at once, leaving the poor woman standing there without any idea where to go. I walked over before I could talk myself out of it. First day, she looked up surprised. A few loose strands of dark hair had escaped from her ponytail, framing a face that carried more curiosity than nervousness. "I suppose you could call it that," she replied with a small smile. Her answer sounded unusual, but I didn't think much about it. "Let me guess," I said. "You're looking for conference room B." She blinked. "How did you know?" "Because every new intern gets lost trying to find it." She laughed. The sound was genuine, warm, and completely unforced. "So the building is designed to confuse people?" "I've worked here 7 years," I replied. "I'm still convinced some of these hallways move at night." She laughed again. "That's reassuring." I pointed toward the eastern corridor. "Come on, I'm heading that way." As we walked, she looked around with genuine interest, studying the artwork on the walls and occasionally glancing through the glass offices lining the hallway. "You seem to know everyone," she observed after several employees greeted me. "I've been here long enough." "So, you're important?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "Not even close. I'm just a guy people blame when a marketing campaign doesn't work." She smiled. "I have a feeling you're underselling yourself. That's because confidence in marketing is often mistaken for arrogance." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "Interesting philosophy. It's survival." When we reached the conference room, she looked inside before turning back toward me. "Thank you." "No problem." I leaned against the doorframe. "One piece of advice." She folded her arms with playful curiosity. "I'm listening." "The coffee on the 4th floor is terrible." "Really? It tastes like someone filtered hot water through old cardboard." She laughed again. "So that's the biggest challenge I'll face." "I'd say so. If you survive the coffee, you'll survive the company." She smiled with an expression that was oddly difficult to read. "I'll remember that." Before I could ask her name, my phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. "Executive budget meeting. In 2 minutes." I groaned dramatically. "There goes my morning." She looked amused. "Good luck." "I'll need it." As I hurried toward the executive conference room, I glanced back once. She was still standing outside conference room B, smiling to herself as though our conversation had been far more entertaining than I realized. The budget meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. By the time it finally ended, my head felt like it had been stuffed with spreadsheets, quarterly forecasts, and enough financial terminology to last a lifetime. As I walked back toward the marketing department, I spotted Ben Carter leaning against my desk with a grin that immediately made me suspicious. Ben and I had joined the company around the same time. Somehow, we had survived years of impossible deadlines, difficult clients, and more emergency meetings than either of us cared to count. He wasn't just my coworker. He was my best friend. "So," Ben said, crossing his arms, "who's the girl?" I blinked. "What girl?" "The one you escorted through half the building this morning." "Oh," I shrugged casually. "Just a new intern." Ben raised an eyebrow. "You talked to her for almost 15 minutes. I was being helpful." "You smiled." "I smile." You almost never smile before lunch. I sighed. Fine. She seemed nice. Ben laughed. I knew it. What? You like her? I don't even know her name. That has never stopped you from noticing someone. I rolled my eyes. I simply felt bad because she looked lost, and the fact that she's beautiful had absolutely nothing to do with it. I took another sip of coffee before making a face. This coffee is terrible. Ben laughed. You changed the subject. I improved the conversation. He shook his head. Just remember, office romances can become complicated. I know. I'm not planning a wedding. I'm talking about lunch. Before Ben could tease me any further, I noticed the mysterious visitor walking past the marketing department. She had exchanged her confused expression for one of quiet confidence. Instead of wandering through the building, she now seemed to know exactly where she was going. Our eyes met. She smiled. I smiled back. Then, without thinking, I caught up with her. Hey, she stopped. Hello again. So, I rubbed the back of my neck. How's your first day going? She looked thoughtful. It's been very interesting. I told you, the coffee is the biggest challenge. She laughed. You weren't exaggerating. I never joke about bad coffee. She smiled. I'll remember that. For a few moments, we simply stood there talking. She asked how long I had worked at the company. I told her about the marketing department, our impossible deadlines, and the constant race to stay ahead of competitors. She listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions that most new employees would never think to ask. Instead of pretending to understand everything, she seemed genuinely curious. It made the conversation surprisingly easy. Finally, I decided to take a chance. So, she waited. Would you maybe like to have lunch together sometime this week? She looked at me for a second before a small smile appeared. I'll think about it. That wasn't exactly a yes, but it wasn't no either. I'll take that as progress. You seem very optimistic. I work in marketing. If we weren't optimistic, nobody would buy anything. She laughed once more. I suppose that's true. Just then, someone called my name from across the hallway. Jake. I turned to see Ben waving impatiently. Our client meeting starts in 5 minutes. I looked back at the mysterious woman. I should go. So should I. I smiled. I still don't know your name. She hesitated for the briefest moment. Then she extended her hand. Emma. Jake. I know. That answer caught me off guard. Before I could ask what she meant, she gave me one last smile and walked toward the executive elevator, the one normally reserved for senior leadership and board members. I assumed she had simply taken the wrong elevator. I thought nothing of it. As Ben and I headed toward our meeting, he glanced back at Emma disappearing behind the closing elevator doors. You really think she's an intern? Of course. He shrugged. I've got a strange feeling about her. I laughed. You watch too many mystery shows. What neither of us knew was that the entire executive floor had been preparing since dawn for the arrival of the company's secret owner. And the woman wearing the visitor badge, the woman I'd spent the morning teasing about terrible coffee and surviving her first day, was the very person every executive in the building was desperately trying to impress. Tuesday morning began like every other workday. I arrived at the office carrying my laptop, a travel mug of coffee, and a growing confidence that maybe asking Emma to lunch hadn't been as embarrassing as it first seemed. She hadn't said no. She had smiled. That counted for something. When I reached my desk, Ben was already waiting with his usual expression of amusement. You look suspiciously cheerful. I had coffee before coming in. Liar. He folded his arms. You're thinking about the mysterious intern. I pretended to organize the papers on my desk. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? You spent half the afternoon looking toward the executive elevators. I was waiting for a client. You've never waited for a client with that smile. Before I could defend myself, an email notification appeared on every computer in the department. Mandatory executive assembly, 9 a.m. Attendance required for all department managers and senior staff. Ben frowned. That's unusual. I nodded. The rumor is the new majority owner is finally visiting. For months, stories had circulated throughout the company. After Charles Reynolds, the legendary founder of Anderson and Cole Technologies, stepped away from daily operations because of health concerns, no one knew exactly who would take control. Some employees believed an international investment firm had purchased the company. Others insisted a famous technology billionaire was buying a controlling interest. Everyone had a different theory. No one knew the truth. At 5 minutes before 9, we joined dozens of managers walking toward the executive boardroom. The atmosphere felt unusually tense. Assistants hurried through the hallways carrying folders. Security personnel stood outside doors that normally remained open. Even Linda Chun, our calm and endlessly organized human resources director, looked more serious than usual. She greeted employees politely, but kept checking her watch. "This feels intense," Ben whispered. "I've never seen this many executives nervous." I glanced around the room. Senior vice presidents stood in small groups reviewing notes. Division directors adjusted their ties. Even people who normally acted completely relaxed suddenly looked as though they were preparing for final exams. I leaned toward Ben. "Maybe the new owner is planning major changes. Or layoffs." "Don't say that. I'm trying to stay optimistic." "You're in marketing. Optimism is literally part of your job." I laughed quietly. A few minutes later, Charles Reynolds entered the boardroom. Although he had retired from everyday management, his reputation filled the room before he even spoke. Everyone immediately stood. The 70-year-old founder smiled warmly. "Good morning. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces." After a few opening remarks about the company's history and future, he looked toward the entrance. "I'd like everyone to meet the person who will be leading Anderson & Cole into its next chapter." The room fell completely silent. Every eye turned toward the doors. I took another sip of coffee. The doors slowly opened. A woman stepped inside, wearing a perfectly tailored navy business suit. Her hair was neatly tied back. Her confident posture commanded the room without a single word. For one impossible second, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. Then recognition hit me like a freight train. The visitor badge, the terrible coffee, the hallway conversations, the invitation to lunch. Emma. She wasn't carrying a notebook like an intern. She wasn't looking for directions anymore. She walked with calm confidence straight toward the front of the boardroom. The coffee nearly slipped from my hand. For several long seconds, I simply stared. It had to be a coincidence. Maybe she was an executive assistant. Maybe she was a consultant. Maybe. Charles Reynolds smiled proudly as she reached the front of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "it is my pleasure to introduce my daughter, Emma Reynolds." He rested a hand lightly on her shoulder. Effective immediately, Emma becomes the majority owner and executive chair of Anderson & Cole Technologies. The room erupted into applause. Every executive stood. Every department head followed. Ben nudged my arm. "Hard. Jake," he whispered through clenched teeth. "Stand up." I realized I was still sitting in complete shock. I stood so quickly that my chair rolled backward. A few people glanced in my direction. I wish they hadn't. Emma accepted the applause with calm confidence. She didn't wave dramatically or try to command attention. She simply waited until the room grew quiet. "Thank you." Her voice was warm but steady. "My father built this company through hard work, integrity, and a belief that talented people deserve opportunities. I intend to continue those values." She spoke about innovation, teamwork, and expanding into new international markets. It was an impressive speech. Clear, confident, thoughtful. Unfortunately, I remembered almost none of it. My brain kept replaying one sentence from the previous morning. "The coffee on the 4th floor tastes like someone filtered hot water through old cardboard." I'd said that to the owner of the company. Ben leaned toward me again. "You flirted with the boss." "I know. You asked the boss to lunch." "I know. You joked about company coffee to the boss." "I was there, Ben." He covered his mouth to hide a laugh. "I can't believe this." Neither could I. Halfway through the presentation, Emma's eyes briefly met mine. For a terrifying second, I expected her to call me out in front of everyone. Instead, one corner of her mouth lifted ever so slightly. A tiny smile. Then she calmly continued speaking as if nothing had happened. That somehow made me even more nervous. The meeting concluded with another round of applause. As soon as Emma and Charles Reynolds left the room with the senior executives, conversations exploded throughout the boardroom. Did anyone know he had a daughter? I heard she spent years building companies overseas. She's younger than I expected. Ben folded his arms and looked directly at me. So, I sighed. Go ahead. Remember when I warned you flirting at work could become a disaster? You were right. I'd like that in writing. I rolled my eyes despite my embarrassment. Don't enjoy this too much. Oh, I'm going to enjoy it forever. As we walked back toward the marketing department, coworkers couldn't stop whispering. Some had noticed Emma and me talking the previous day. Others had seen us walking together in the hallway. The rumors spread faster than any marketing campaign I'd ever launched. One manager passed me and smiled knowingly. Tough morning. You could say that. Another colleague laughed. At least she smiled at you. I don't know if that's good or bad. Neither do we. By lunchtime, I had convinced myself my career was finished. Surely the new owner wouldn't appreciate being mistaken for an intern. Surely she wouldn't forget that I'd teased her, joked with her, and casually invited her to lunch before knowing who she really was. I imagined awkward meetings, formal warnings, maybe even being reassigned to another department. Every worst-case scenario ran through my head. As I sat alone at my desk, staring at a report without reading a single word, one thought kept repeating itself. 24 hours earlier, I had walked through the office believing I'd met the cutest intern the company had ever hired. Now I was almost certain I had flirted my way into unemployment. What I didn't know was that Emma Reynolds wasn't offended by our first meeting at all. In fact, out of everyone she had met since inheriting the company, I was the only person who had treated her like an ordinary human being instead of the woman who signed everyone's paychecks. For the next 3 days, I expected the email. Every time my inbox refreshed, I braced myself for a message from Human Resources. Please report to Executive Conference Room A. Or perhaps something even worse. Your conduct has been brought to management's attention. Instead, nothing happened. No disciplinary meeting. No warning. No awkward conversation. Emma Reynolds continued touring departments, meeting employees, and reviewing company operations as though our strange first encounter had never happened. That somehow made me even more nervous. By Friday afternoon, I had almost convinced myself I had escaped the situation. Then my office phone rang. Jake Anderson. Speaking. This is Linda Chun from Human Resources. My stomach dropped. Ms. Reynolds would like to meet with you. Now, if possible. I'll be there. The walk to the executive floor felt longer than it ever had before. Ben noticed me passing his desk. Where are you going? Emma wants to see me. He winced dramatically. I'll start updating my resume in your honor. Very funny. I'm serious. If you disappear, I'm telling everyone you died heroically. I managed a weak smile before stepping into the executive elevator. A few moments later, Linda greeted me outside Emma's office. She's expecting you. I took one deep breath and knocked gently. Come in. Emma sat behind a large wooden desk overlooking the city skyline. Without the visitor badge and casual clothes, she looked every bit the executive everyone expected. But when she smiled, I recognized the same woman who had laughed about terrible coffee in the hallway. Please have a seat. Thank you. I sat carefully, unsure what to expect. She closed the folder in front of her. You've seemed unusually nervous this week. I couldn't help laughing. Can you blame me? Not really. I've spent 4 days assuming I accidentally insulted the owner of the company. The tension in the room disappeared almost instantly. I'm not angry, Jake. I know. I just wasn't expecting any of this. Neither was I. She leaned back in her chair. I actually appreciated meeting someone who wasn't trying to impress me. That answer surprised me. I thought everyone would want that. You'd be amazed. She picked up a file and slid it across the desk. I didn't ask you here to discuss coffee. That's disappointing. She smiled. I asked you here because I've reviewed your work. I opened the folder. Inside were marketing reports, campaign summaries, and performance reviews with my name on every page. You've led 3 of our most successful product launches in the last 2 years. You consistently finish projects under budget. And according to your team, you encourage younger employees instead of taking credit for their ideas. I looked up. You read all this? I read everything. She folded her hands. Our company is preparing to launch a new international branding campaign. I want you to lead it. For a moment, I was certain I had misunderstood. Me? Yes. There are directors with far more experience. There are. but experience isn't the only thing I value. Before I could respond, someone knocked on the office door. A confident woman carrying a tablet stepped inside. Sorry to interrupt. I've brought the preliminary design concepts. Emma smiled. Perfect timing. Jake, this is Sophia Martinez, our creative director. Sophia shook my hand warmly. I've heard great things about your campaigns. I smiled awkwardly. I've mostly heard embarrassing stories about myself this week. Sophia laughed. I have a feeling those are about to become much less important. Over the next several weeks, my days look completely different. Instead of managing only my usual marketing projects, I worked closely with Emma and Sophia on the company's biggest international campaign in years. The project demanded long hours, endless brainstorming sessions, and more revisions than I cared to count. But for the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely inspired. Emma never acted like someone who owned the company. She arrived before most employees. She stayed late when deadlines approached. She listened far more than she spoke. One afternoon, Sophia spread several advertisement concepts across the conference table. I think we're trying too hard, she admitted. Emma looked toward me. What do you think? I hesitated. The campaign had already gone through approval from several senior managers. Suggesting major changes felt risky. Emma noticed my uncertainty. Be honest. We're all here to improve the idea. I took a slow breath. I think the campaign feels polished. Sophia smiled. That's usually a compliment, but it doesn't feel real. Both women waited for me to continue. Our customers don't just buy products. They buy trust. If everything looks too perfect, people won't connect with it. The room became quiet. Emma looked down at the presentation for several moments. Finally, she smiled. That's exactly what's missing. Instead of defending the original plan, she picked up a pen and began making notes. Sophia nodded enthusiastically. I think he's right. Within an hour, we had completely reshaped the campaign. Walking back to my office later that afternoon, I realized something surprising. Emma had never once reminded anyone that she owned the company. She earned respect by listening, not by demanding it. A few days later, after another successful planning session, Emma and I stopped by the employee cafe for coffee. She took one sip and laughed. You know, what? You weren't wrong. I smiled. About what? The coffee. It really is terrible. I laughed so hard that several employees looked in our direction. I can't believe you admitted it. I've learned to accept uncomfortable truths. She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. Actually, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. I raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. The visitor badge. You've probably wondered why I was walking around the building alone that first day. I assumed someone forgot to meet you. She shook her head. It was intentional. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? My father and I agreed that before I officially took over, I should spend one day inside the company without anyone knowing who I was. She looked out the cafe window. I wanted to see how people treated someone they believed had no influence. The answer caught me completely off guard. What happened? A few people were wonderful. She smiled. The receptionist apologized for being busy and asked me to wait. Several employees offered directions. Then her smile faded slightly. Others ignored me. One manager walked straight past after I asked for help. Another assumed I was wasting everyone's time because I was just a visitor. I shook my head. Seriously? She nodded. I learned more in 3 hours than I could have from 100 reports. She looked directly at me. You never asked whether I was important. You never treated me differently because of my title. You simply saw someone who looked lost. I thought back to that Monday morning. I honestly believed you were an intern. I know, and strangely enough, she smiled. That made the conversation one of the most honest I'd had in years. As I walked home that evening, I kept thinking about everything I'd learned. Before meeting Emma, I had assumed people born into extraordinary wealth rarely understood ordinary employees. She had quietly destroyed every stereotype I believed. Behind the expensive suit and impressive title wasn't someone demanding admiration. She was someone who valued honesty, hard work, and respect, especially when no one thought it would matter. Somewhere between my embarrassing first impression and the weeks we spent working together, admiration had quietly replaced humiliation. And for the first time since I met the woman with the visitor badge, I realized the biggest challenge ahead wasn't protecting my career. It was protecting my heart. 3 months after Emma became executive chair, the company felt different. The changes weren't dramatic at first. They were the kind people noticed slowly. Employees were encouraged to share ideas directly with leadership. Junior staff were invited to strategy sessions that had once been limited to senior executives. Anonymous feedback boxes appeared in every department, and, unlike before, people actually received responses. For the first time in years, it felt as though every voice mattered. Most employees welcomed the changes. Not everyone did. People who had built their influence on closed-door meetings and office politics suddenly found themselves answering difficult questions. One of them was Victor Hayes. Victor had been a senior executive for nearly 15 years. He was polished, intelligent, and exceptionally good at taking credit for successful projects while quietly blaming others when things went wrong. He smiled often, but somehow his smiles never reached his eyes. The first time Emma questioned one of his budget proposals during an executive meeting, I noticed something change. His expression remained polite. His tone stayed professional. Yet beneath the surface, I could almost feel his resentment. After the meeting, Ben walked beside me toward the elevators. Victor looked like he wanted to throw his presentation out the window. I laughed. Emma only asked him to explain the numbers. Exactly, and he hates explaining anything. I shrugged. Maybe he'll get used to it. Ben gave me a doubtful look. I wouldn't count on it. At first, the rumors were subtle. A passing comment in the break room. A whispered conversation that stopped whenever someone walked by. I ignored them. Office gossip usually disappeared as quickly as it appeared. Then one afternoon, Sophia knocked on my office door. "You have a minute?" "Of course." She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. That immediately caught my attention. "What's wrong?" She hesitated before speaking. "I think you should know what's being said." I frowned. "About the campaign?" "No, about you." She looked uncomfortable. And Emma, a knot formed in my stomach. "What kind of rumors?" Sophia sighed. "Some people are claiming the only reason you were chosen to lead the international campaign is because Emma likes the attention you give her." I stared at her in disbelief. "Seriously?" She nodded. "They're saying your promotion had nothing to do with your work." I leaned back in my chair, tried to process the words. For weeks, our team had worked late nights. We had rewritten strategies, tested ideas, built a campaign that everyone agreed was the strongest the company had produced in years. Now, people were pretending none of that mattered. "They're insulting both of us," I said quietly. Sophia nodded. "I know." I rubbed my forehead. "Where is this coming from?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she handed me a printed email. It wasn't signed, but several comments quoted conversations that sounded remarkably similar to things Victor Hayes had been saying during recent executive meetings. Carefully worded, impossible to trace directly, yet damaging all the same. The rumor spread faster than I imagined. Within 2 days, people stopped talking when I entered the cafeteria. Conversations ended the moment I approached. One afternoon, I even caught 2 managers glancing toward Emma's office before looking at me and whispering to each other. I had spent years earning respect through hard work. Watching it disappear because of unfounded gossip was more painful than I expected. The worst part wasn't what people believed about me. It was what they believed about Emma. She had worked harder than anyone in the building. Now, some people were reducing every achievement she made to office gossip. I decided then that staying silent would only make things worse. The truth deserved someone willing to speak for it. Even if doing so came with a cost, the opportunity came sooner than I expected. At the end of the week, Emma scheduled a company-wide leadership meeting to present the progress of our international marketing campaign. Department managers, executives, and team leaders filled the large conference hall. I stood near the front with Sophia, reviewing the final presentation while employees found their seats. Emma stepped onto the stage. She had barely begun speaking when Victor Hayes raised his hand. His smile looked polite. Too polite. "Before we continue," he said smoothly, "I believe some employees have concerns about how certain project leaders were selected." The room became noticeably quieter. Emma met his gaze calmly. "If you have a question, Mr. Hayes, please ask it directly." Victor nodded. There have been rumors suggesting personal relationships may have influenced recent appointments. He never said my name. He didn't need to. Everyone understood exactly who he meant. A murmur spread through the audience. I looked toward Emma. She remained completely composed. I selected project leaders based on qualifications and documented performance. My decision was supported by measurable results. Victor gave a small shrug. I'm sure that's your belief. Something inside me refused to stay silent. I stood. Every head in the room turned toward me. Ben looked as though he wanted to pull me back into my chair. Sophia watched quietly. I took a slow breath. If anyone believes I received this position because of favoritism, I said clearly, then I invite you to review every campaign I've led over the past 7 years. The room fell silent. I earned promotions before Emma Reynolds ever walked into this company. I worked late nights, missed holidays, and built results I'm proud to stand behind. Then I looked toward Emma, and Ms. Reynolds has never once treated me differently than anyone else. If anything, she's challenged my ideas more than anyone in this building. A few people smiled. I continued. Some of you met her after learning she owned the company. I met her when I thought she was a lost visitor. A ripple of laughter spread through the room. I treated her with respect because that's how people should treat each other, not because I expected anything in return. I turned toward Victor. If respecting another person has become suspicious around here, then perhaps the problem isn't the people being accused. The silence that followed felt completely different. Not uncomfortable. Thoughtful. Emma stepped forward. Thank you, Jake. Then she addressed the room. Since transparency seems important today, I'd like to share something. She nodded toward Linda Chun. The Human Resources Director connected her laptop to the projector. Several documents appeared on the large screen. Performance evaluations, project scores, leadership reviews. Every selection process for the international campaign had been carefully documented months before assignments were finalized. Each decision included measurable performance data and written recommendations from multiple department heads. There was no favoritism, only evidence. Linda spoke calmly. Our internal review also traced the origin of several anonymous rumors. Another document appeared. Email timestamps, forwarded messages, meeting notes. Although Victor had avoided making direct accusations himself, the record showed he had repeatedly encouraged conversations that distorted facts and damaged employees' reputations. Victor's confidence disappeared. This has been taken out of context. Emma answered without raising her voice. Context doesn't change written records. The board members exchanged quiet glances. One finally spoke. Mr. Hayes, we'll discuss this matter privately after today's meeting. Victor lowered his eyes. For the first time since I had known him, he had nothing to say. When the meeting ended, employees gathered around us. Not with whispers this time, but with congratulations. Several apologized for believing the rumors. Others thanked Emma for handling the situation with professionalism instead of anger. As the room slowly emptied, Emma walked over to me. You didn't have to speak. I know. You risked your own reputation. I smiled. You once told me honesty matters most when nobody thinks it will. She laughed softly. I did say that. I'm just trying to keep up with my boss. She shook her head, smiling. I prefer something else. What? My friend. For the first time since the woman with the visitor badge had wandered into my life, I realized our relationship had grown into something built on trust, respect, and shared values. And somehow, that meant far more to me than the awkward flirtation that had started. At all 6 months passed faster than I expected. The international marketing campaign exceeded every projection the company had made. Our products reached new markets, employee satisfaction improved, and for the first time in years, people looked forward to coming to work instead of simply counting the hours until they could go home. Emma's leadership had transformed more than the company's profits. She had transformed its culture. Ideas mattered more than job titles. Respect mattered more than office politics. People were rewarded for solving problems instead of protecting their positions. Watching those changes happen from the inside made me admire her even more. One Friday afternoon, after another successful board meeting, Emma stopped by my office. Are you busy? I looked up from my laptop. I can be finished in about 3 seconds. She laughed. I was hoping you'd say that. I closed the computer. What can I help you with? She leaned casually against the doorframe. I owe someone lunch. For a second, I simply stared at her. Then I remembered. Months earlier, the hallway, the visitor badge, my awkward invitation. I smiled. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten. I told you I'd think about it. You certainly took your time. I like making important decisions carefully. I stood and picked at my jacket. So, is this lunch with my boss? She shook her head. The workday is over. She smiled warmly. This is lunch with Emma. Those words somehow made me even happier. We walked to a small family-owned cafe a few blocks from the office. Unlike the expensive restaurants many executives preferred, it was quiet, comfortable, and famous for homemade sandwiches. Emma glanced around the room with obvious appreciation. I've never been here. You're missing out. I've been told. After we ordered, conversation came naturally. For nearly an hour, we barely mentioned work. Instead, we talked about childhood memories, favorite books, travel, and the embarrassing hobbies we usually kept hidden. I still build model airplanes sometimes, I admitted. Emma smiled. That's not embarrassing. You haven't seen how seriously I take it. She laughed. My secret is worse. Oh, I collect antique postcards. I blinked. I wasn't expecting that. Most people aren't. What started it? She stirred her tea thoughtfully. My father traveled constantly while building the company. He always mailed me postcards from wherever he was. I still have every single one. I smiled. That actually explains a lot. What does? You notice details other people overlook. She looked pleasantly surprised. I've never thought about it that way. As we left the cafe, we decided to walk through the nearby park before heading home. The evening air was cool, and the paths were lined with trees beginning to change color. For the first time since meeting her, I wasn't thinking about job titles or awkward first impressions. I was simply enjoying her company. Emma stopped beside a small lake where ducks drifted peacefully across the water. It's strange, she said quietly. What is? I've spent most of my life wondering whether people liked me. She looked toward the lake. Or my last name. I understood more than she probably realized. People often assumed wealth solved every problem. Standing beside Emma, I realized it created its own kind of loneliness. She wasn't looking for admiration. She was looking for honesty. And somewhere along the way, I had stopped seeing the billionaire who owned the company. All I saw was the woman who laughed at terrible coffee, appreciated simple conversations, and somehow made every ordinary moment feel a little brighter. I got to be just Emma. I reached over and gently took her hand. I'm glad you got lost. She laughed. I wasn't actually lost. I know, but if you hadn't been wandering around pretending to be, we never would have met. She squeezed my hand. I think that's true. Over the following months, our relationship grew naturally. We kept our personal lives separate from work, maintaining clear professional boundaries in the office while spending time together outside of it. There were no dramatic declarations, no extravagant gifts, just honest conversations, shared dinners, weekend walks, and the quiet joy of getting to know each other without pretending to be anyone else. Ben, of course, refused to let me forget how everything had started. Whenever we passed the fourth-floor coffee machine, he grinned. Best cup of terrible coffee you've ever had. Without question, Sophia laughed every time she heard the story. The funniest part is that Jake tried to impress the future owner by warning her about the coffee. I wasn't trying to impress her. You accidentally did. Even Emma joined in the teasing. Sometimes she would hand me a cup from the office cafe and ask with a perfectly serious expression, "Does this still taste like hot water filtered through cardboard?" My answer was always the same. The coffee is still terrible, but meeting you made every Monday morning worth showing up for. Looking back, I realized the luckiest mistake of my life had begun with one completely wrong assumption. I thought I was helping a nervous intern find a conference room. Instead, I found someone who reminded me that the strongest relationships are never built on wealth, titles, or status. They're built on honesty, kindness, shared laughter, and seeing the person standing in front of you, not the position they hold. And in the end, that unexpected meeting with a girl wearing a visitor badge became the best first day either of us could have imagined. 1 year later, I stood beneath the glass entrance of our company's newest international headquarters, watching employees, clients, and business partners gather for the grand opening ceremony. The building represented years of planning, thousands of hours of work, and one of the biggest milestones in the company's history. A year earlier, I would have believed standing here was the greatest achievement of my career. Now I knew better. Careers matter. Success matters. But neither compares to sharing those victories with the right person. I adjusted my tie as Ben walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to me with an exaggerated grin. I checked. The coffee's actually good. I laughed. So we finally fixed the company's biggest problem? Apparently Emma made it a priority. I always suspected she took your criticism personally. I took a sip. He was right. For the first time since I'd joined the company, the coffee was genuinely excellent. I don't know how to feel. Ben smirked. You've lost your favorite complaint. Before I could answer, Sophia joined us. She looked around the impressive lobby with obvious pride. I still can't believe how much the company has changed. Neither could I. The headquarters wasn't just larger. It reflected everything Emma believed about leadership. Open workspaces encouraged collaboration instead of competition. Comfortable meeting areas replaced intimidating executive offices. Every floor included quiet spaces where employees could relax, read, or simply take a break. The building wasn't designed to impress visitors. It was designed to support the people who worked there every day. That was Emma. She always asked one question before making any decision. How does this help our people? Watching employees laugh together during the opening celebration, I realized how much that philosophy had transformed the company. A round of applause echoed through the lobby as Emma stepped onto the stage. She wore a simple navy suit similar to the one she had worn the day I discovered she owned the company. Confident, professional, approachable. Charles Reynolds watched proudly from the front row. Although officially retired, he still attended important company events. I caught him smiling as Emma thanked every employee who had contributed to the new headquarters. Not once did she claim credit for herself. Instead, she celebrated the people around her. That humility never stopped impressing me. When the ceremony ended, guests explored the building while journalists interviewed department leaders. I found myself standing beside Emma near one of the large windows overlooking the city. You did it, I said. She smiled. We all did. I mean it. You've built something extraordinary. She looked around at the busy offices. I inherited a company. The people inside it built everything else. That answer summed her up perfectly. She never measured success by titles, only by people. Later that afternoon, the formal celebration ended. Most guests headed home. A few executives gathered for dinner. I turned toward Emma. I have one more place I'd like to visit. She looked curious. Now, it won't take long. She studied my expression before smiling. All right. 20 minutes later, we stood outside a familiar neighborhood cafe. Emma laughed the moment she recognized it. No way. I opened the door for her. I thought it was the perfect place. Inside, almost nothing had changed. The same wooden tables. The same framed photographs on the walls. Even the elderly owner greeted us with the same warm smile as always. Emma looked around fondly. Our first lunch. I nodded. And one of the best decisions I ever made. She smiled, completely unaware that another life-changing moment was waiting just a few minutes away. Emma smiled as we sat at the same table where we had shared our first lunch together. The cafe was quieter than usual. Soft music played in the background, and the evening sunlight streamed through the windows exactly as it had a year earlier. The owner recognized us immediately. So, he said with a grin, setting 2 cups of coffee on the table. Has the coffee improved since your first visit? Emma laughed before I could answer. It has. I picked up my cup and took a thoughtful sip. It's still not perfect. She shook her head, smiling. I don't think you'll ever stop saying that. Probably not. For a few minutes, we simply talked about the day, the successful opening, the excitement of the employees, the future projects already waiting for us. Then the conversation slowly faded into a comfortable silence. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. Emma noticed the movement, but didn't say anything. I stood and walked around the table until I was beside her. She looked up at me with a puzzled smile. Jake, I took a slow breath. A year ago, I walked into our office believing I was helping a nervous intern find a conference room. She laughed softly. "You've never let yourself forget that." "I hope I never do." I smiled, because that misunderstanding changed my life. I carefully lowered myself onto one knee. Emma's eyes widened. "Oh, I spent years believing my biggest dream was earning promotions and building a successful career. I achieved many of those goals. But somewhere along the way, I realized none of them meant as much as the person standing beside me." I opened the small velvet box. Inside rested a simple, elegant engagement ring. "Emma Reynolds, you taught me that real leadership begins with humility. You reminded me that titles never tell the whole story. And every single day, you inspire me to become a better man than I was the day we first met." I smiled through the emotion in my voice. "So, will you marry me?" For a heartbeat, Emma simply stared at me. Then happy tears filled her eyes. She laughed and cried at the same time before covering her mouth with one hand. "Yes." Her voice trembled. "Of course I'll marry you." "Yes." I slipped the ring onto her finger as she wrapped her arms around me. The small cafe erupted into applause. I turned in surprise. Ben stepped out from behind a nearby booth, clapping enthusiastically. Sophia followed, laughing as she wiped away a tear. Linda Chun smiled warmly beside Charles Reynolds, who looked happier than I had ever seen him. Emma looked at me in astonishment. "You planned this?" I grinned. "I had a little help." Charles walked over and embraced his daughter. "I'm proud of both of you." He turned to me with a smile. "And thank you, not for building successful marketing campaigns, but for loving my daughter for exactly who she is." I nodded quietly. "She's easy to love." Ben pretended to clear his throat dramatically. "I'd just like everyone to remember that this entire romance began because Jake thought the owner of a billion-dollar company was an intern." Laughter filled the cafe. Sophia smiled. "And somehow, that terrible assumption turned into the best decision of his life." Even Emma couldn't stop laughing. She looked at me with the same warm smile that had first caught my attention in the office hallway. "To be fair," she teased, "you did give excellent advice." "Oh, the coffee really was terrible." Everyone laughed again. As we left the cafe hand in hand, I glanced back at the table where our journey had truly begun. One ordinary Monday morning, I had assumed I was helping a lost visitor. Instead, life had quietly introduced me to the woman who would become my greatest partner, my closest friend, and the love of my life. Looking back, I realized extraordinary opportunities rarely announce themselves with grand entrances. Sometimes they arrive wearing a visitor badge, asking for directions and laughing at jokes about terrible coffee. The greatest achievement of my life was never the promotion I once dreamed about. It was learning to see the person behind the title instead of the title behind the person. And in the end, that simple lesson gave me everything I had ever been searching for.